That I don't know, I'm Bill Marvin, one of the board members of the Mackinaw Area Historic Society. There are multiple board members here tonight, and let me tell you, these folks work really hard, keeping up Heritage Village, putting on these programs, all the educational programs we run, the school programs, running fundraising and all those things. Speaking of fundraising, Mary Ann Moore is back there and told me the other day that our raffle is sold out, which is one of our major fundraisers. So Mary Ann, thank you. I did it for years before Mary Ann took over. It is a ton of work, and she just did a great job, sold it out. Where's Sandy? Our president is here. Angie Borthland, Leanne Ewer, Frank is somewhere. Where's Frank? Frank, Roy. If you get a chance, chat with them. They work very hard on this. And if you'd love to donate some money, or to, we will take anything from a dime to $1 million, and we do take credit cards. So if you, or time, we would love to have volunteers out there, everything from grass people to gardeners to anybody who'd like to spend some time in just an absolutely gorgeous setting. Well, this is a continuation of the series that we've been running all summer of local businesses and local institutions. And one of my favorite local institutions is the Mackinaw Island State Park Commission. I was fortunate enough to be appointed to it by Governor Snyder over 12 years ago now. And the very first gentleman who came to greet me, my mentor, our chairman at that time, was Dennis Cawthorne. And I'm not sure if he'll share all the stories he shared with me, but he knows this commission inside and out. It's a wonderful organization, and Dennis knows it as well as anybody. He has also had a wonderful history himself, 50 years on the island, 50 plus now. A great partner in Attorney General Frank Kelly for years, who was also on the commission. And Kelly Cawthorne was a great organization for years. Frank, of course, is now gone. And unfortunately, this year we did lose the person who was then our president. And we were very sad, very energetic, a very wonderful guy, Larry Flynn. And so we have always wanted to mention the efforts that he made, particularly with developing the 100-acre woods that was donated to us by Virginia May. It now has all kinds of signage denoting the flora and fauna and all kinds of things. So lots going on. We're very busy. Also, we have a museum in the Hook Restaurant. So just come and see us anytime, visit on the web, whatever. Dennis, you're on.
Thank you.
Dennis Cawthorne.
Thank you. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and I really appreciate the kind invitation to be here, and it's good to see so many friends and even have my grandchildren show up. I first of all want to say that in my opinion, Bill Marvin has done a wonderful job on the State Park Commission, not only for Mackinaw City as its representative, but also just as a member of the State Park Commission. And Bill, we thank you very much for your very fine service.
Thank you.
Well, many people don't know it, but Mackinaw Island was America's second national park. Such was the growing reputation of Mackinaw Island that U.S. Senator Thomas Ferry in 1875 led an effort, partially to keep the troops at Fort Mackinac busy, to have Mackinaw Island and the federal land there designated as a national park. Consequently, he was successful, and 3 years after the first national park, Yellowstone, Mackinaw became a national park. Well, for the next 19 years, things went well. But in 1894, the U.S. Secretary of War decided that we needed to close some forts and consolidate the military. We were generally at peace, except perhaps out west. And consequently, Fort Mackinac was one of the forts designated to be closed. And so in 1894, the soldiers of the fort, all but 11 of them and the commanding officer, marched down the ramparts and left Mackinaw Island. So now the issue was, okay, what's going to happen to the federal lands on Mackinaw Island? Although the Secretary of War favored selling them generally, U.S. Senator James McMillan of Michigan decided, after hearing from islanders, that he wanted to press to have the state of Michigan be able to obtain the federal lands. And so he was successful in getting the U.S. Congress in 1895 to approve a bill which allowed the state of Michigan to make application to receive the land, and they added to it, the feds, a provision that if the land ever ceased to be used for park purposes, it would revert back to the United States. On May 31st, 1895, the Michigan legislature submitted their application and decided that Mackinaw Island would be our state's first state park, and they created a state park commission to govern it. On September 16th, 1895, the last 11 soldiers marched down the ramparts and departed the island, and the federal evacuation was complete, and now Mackinaw Island was indeed a part of the state of Michigan. One of the outcomes of that, however, was that on the island there was therefore created two governments, and this still exists today. There is the Mackinaw Island State Park Commission, which at the time governed one half of the island, and then there was this Village of Mackinaw Island Council. A few years later became a city council that governed the other half. And so the two governments shared a constituency and also shared the governance of the island. And over the years, it's created some very interesting situations, and I perhaps can tell you about a few of those in a minute. My very good friend, Judge Bill Crane, is here too. Since 1895, the lands under the Commission's jurisdiction have more than doubled on the island, and now comprise 81% of the island's land area. And of course, the Commission subsequently got jurisdiction of Michilimackinac and then Mill Creek. But perhaps more importantly, as a result of a 1958 important piece of legislation, which was urged by then Governor G. Minnan Williams, the Commission was given great new responsibilities and great new authority, and it very much changed what the Commission had to do and what it was about, and it was a very, very positive change. Now, as you may know, membership on the Commission has historically been the most sought-after position in state government. Being a commissioner or being appointed to the Commission has always been regarded as being a rather big political plum. And the persons who've been chosen over the years have generally been persons who've been close to whoever the governor is, and nearly always those persons had clout of their own, either through themselves or through their association with powerful entities. And further, state law requires that members of the Commission be bipartisan. Not more than 4 members of the 7-member Commission can be members of one political party. Now, that doesn't mean that it's 4 Dems, we'll say, and 3 Republicans. It could be 4 Dems, for example, and 3 nonpartisans. And often governors have kind of played that game, so that just because there must be non-majority members doesn't mean it's going to be the other party. It's going to be nonpartisans. Over the years, the Commission members have included 1 former U.S. Senator, Thomas Ferry, 1 former U.S. Representative, 1 former Secretary of State, 1 former Attorney General, 1 Governor's son, Ferris, a U.S. Representative's wife, 4 national committee members of a political party, and 6 state legislative leaders. The first chairman of the Commission was Thomas Ferry, the man who convinced the U.S. Congress to make Mackinaw our second national park. Ferry was born on Mackinaw Island of parents who were missionaries on the island. You know, the mission church over there, well, they were very active and instrumental in it. And Ferry, the man born on Mackinaw Island, was arguably President of the United States for one day. In 1877, the newly elected President and Vice President, Rutherford B. Hayes and his Vice President, refused to be sworn in on the Sabbath. And therefore, on that day, March 4th, 1877, some historians say Thomas Ferry was president of the United States. So one of my predecessors was the president of the United States. The next person who succeeded Ferry, who was then selected as the first chairman of the commission, and by the way, he only attended 2 meetings before he died in 1896. But he was succeeded by a rather remarkable man also, by the name of Peter White of Marquette, who was a community leader in Marquette and a philanthropist who once walked from Marquette to Lansing to serve in the legislature. I've never quite figured out how that worked, but supposedly he in fact did that. In 1927, the legislature provided that commissioners were to no longer have fixed terms, but rather to serve at the pleasure of the governor. So a new governor could sweep clean and have all new commissioners. Well, the inevitable result of that was that in the 1930s especially, it was a revolving door of commissioners, because in a 10-year period, most people don't know this, in a 10-year period, in the 1930s, Michigan had 7 governors. Because of the Depression, parties switched back and forth, and 1 governor died in office, so there were 7 governors, and as a result, a new governor would sweep out the old commission and put in a brand new one. One of the more remarkable commissioners that I want to mention, and 1 or 2 of you knew him, I think, was a man by the name of Francis Xavier Doyle, Wilfred Francis Xavier Doyle. He was originally from Menominee and was elected for 1 term in the state senate as a Republican, and then didn't run again in 1934, took a position in state government, and subsequently became a lobbyist and became the most successful and powerful lobbyist in Lansing. And so he learned how to do a lot of things to protect the commission, and by the way, himself. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. In 1941, the law was changed to go back to fixed terms. No longer would it be the governor sweeping everybody out when elected. And part of that was due to Bill Doyle. And he convinced the legislature to create a resident commissioner for Mackinaw Island, to be nominated by the mayor of Mackinaw Island. And who else to fit that slot but himself. And so, indeed, the mayor of Mackinaw Island nominated him. The governor had no choice to appoint him, and he was appointed to the commission. He provided additional political insulation for himself by adding a provision that then no more than 4 members of the commission could be a member of 1 political party. So when the Democrats took the governorship, Doyle came back in as resident commissioner, and also as a Republican was pretty much insulated from being replaced by a Democrat. And then there was one other change, rather important too, I should add, and that was that in 1959, the legislature added a member to be from Mackinaw City. And that first member was someone many of you perhaps knew. That was Neil Downing, proprietor of Downing's Restaurant. So Neil Downing became a member of the commission and took the 7th commission seat, the Mackinaw City seat, in 1959. In my early years on the island, the commission was sort of famous for the longevity of the tenure of its members. Joe Thompson was first appointed in 1935 and served 26 years in various times until 1977. The resourceful Bill Doyle served 41 years between 1939 and 85, and then quit only when the governor promised to throw him a farewell party at the governor's mansion. Ken Tyson served 33 consecutive years from 1964 to 1997. East Bluffer James Dunnigan served 32 consecutive years from 1949 to 1981. And Walter J. Murray served 25 consecutive years from 1959 to 84. And while my service was much shorter than theirs, 22, I was and have been the longest serving chair in the history of the commission. I served as chair nearly 20 years. Peter White, the man who walked to Lansing, was the previous record holder, and he served about 12 years. In 1958, the commission's responsibilities were greatly expanded. Seeing the success of the revenue bond program that financed the Mackinaw Bridge, Governor Williams envisioned using revenue bonds to make Fort Mackinac an active historical museum that would be the driver of good business throughout the area. And to accomplish that, Governor Williams, who was a staunch liberal Democrat, sought out the owner of the Grand Hotel, W. Stewart Woodfill, a staunch Republican. And Woodfill, being Woodfill, took the position on the commission to achieve this goal of getting legislation to expand the commission's duties, only on the condition that he, Woodfill, be the chairman going forward, which Governor Williams was happy to do because he needed Woodfill. Whereas then existing state law only gave the commission authority to maintain and operate the state park and its slowly crumbling facilities, the new legislative act gave the commission broad authority to, quote, acquire, construct, develop, improve, better, extend, repair, maintain, use, and operate facilities of all kinds that in the judgment of the commission will increase the beauty and utility of the state park facilities and provide recreational, historical, or other facilities for the benefit and enjoyment of the public, and to engage consulting engineers, architects, museum technicians, landscape architects, supervisors, managers, lawyers, fiscal agents, and others as it considers necessary to accomplish this task. So the commission suddenly went from overseeing crumbling buildings to having now the authority to have Fort Mackinac totally restored, and they undertook that. And so it was a whole new era for the commission beginning in 1958. In the 1960s, the commission faced a threat that, again, was solved by Wilfred Francis Xavier Bill Doyle, the lobbyist on the commission. Doyle was still active in Lansing, and so he persuaded the legislature to make an exception for the Mackinac State Park Commission because Michigan got a new constitution in 1963. And that constitution ordered that, that all state agencies and departments be consolidated into 20 state departments. Bill Doyle went to work to convince the legislature to create something new called a Type 1 agency. And that was, and the legislature voted for it, and they did the same for a couple of other state agencies. And as a result of being a Type 1 agency, while the MISP was technically within the DNR, as a practical matter, it was allowed to continue its almost complete independence. And whereas other state boards and commissions have only an advisory role under our 1963 Constitution, the Mackinac State Park Commission is more than advisory. It sets the policies, so it's highly unusual. And there have been efforts to abolish the commission as a Type 1 agency, and efforts to abolish the commission generally, but they have all over the years fortunately failed. And George Weeks of the Detroit News once commented in 1991 when some were trying to get the commission abolished, quote, there are in effect dual governments on the island. Remember the city and the State Park Commission. It is good for the city to have a working relationship with a commission that is not merely advisory and it has to take orders from Lansing. The keeper of Michigan's historical jewel is the Mackinac State Park Commission, and the commission should keep its special powers to protect a special place. Well, the success of the revenue bond project for not only the bridge, but also for Fort Mackinac, then led to the obvious, which was, let's use the revenue bond program to make something happen at Michilimackinac. And so in 1959, the commission committed itself to doing more than watching over a former burned out fort. And by the way, the commission was being pressured by St. Ignace at the time to do something about Fort de Bois, but the commission was not happy with the reception they got in St. Ignace. They were happy with the reception they got in Mackinaw City, and it was at that point in 1959 that the commission decided to commit fully to Michilimackinac. And what happened was, as you may know, initially archaeologists started digging around and kept a treasure trove of things at the Fort Michilimackinac site. And then they also discovered that right under the topsoil of Michilimackinac, there lay the outlines of a entire 1700s village. And so the commission, using $1 million in bond revenue, began to not only push the archaeological digs, which have gone on now for what, 60 years, but also to rebuild Fort Michilimackinac to what it is today. That was a major step forward, and Fort Michilimackinac opened its doors in July of 1960 as a result of that effort. Well, as I mentioned, appointment to the State Park Commission has always been considered a major political plum. No position in state government has been more coveted. More people try to beat the governor into appointing them. And you might wonder why. Well, part of it is kind of illusory, I think. Part of it has been the allure of the popularity, mystique, prestige, and perceived glamour of being associated with Mackinaw Island and its governance. Being a commissioner also meant celebrity status on the local social scene, a team of horses and a chauffeured state carriage at the commissioner's beck and call. Bill Doyle used it a lot. Use of one of the commission's 2 stately Victorian cottages, perched high in the cliffs overlooking the harbor, and a political cachet in Lansing and elsewhere. By 1991, the year that I was appointed by Governor Engler to the commission, I already had my own island home, so I didn't need that. And in a budget-cutting frenzy, the state carriages that took Bill Doyle and others around the island were abolished. And I had already been politically established, for better or worse, in Lansing, so I didn't really need that. But nevertheless, I did look forward enthusiastically to serving on the commission. Now, Engler, who appointed me, in my opinion, was not only a good governor, but he also was a very politically astute guy. And 2 times, his political astuteness came into play with commission appointments. Frank Kelly had served as Attorney General for 37 years. And the story was he's thinking about maybe retiring and leaving. Engler wanted badly to have a Republican Attorney General. And so he sent an emissary, that was me, to talk to Frank Kelly to say, look, if by any chance you decide you don't want to run again, I will have a position for you on the Mackinaw State Park Commission. Well, 1 week later, Frank Kelly announced he was not running for re-election. And on January 1st, 1999, Governor Engler appointed Frank Kelly to the commission, and in a series of odd coincidences or whatever, Frank Kelly also became my law partner at my law firm in Lansing. In 1993, Engler named Chuck Yob, the Republican National Chairman for Michigan, to the commission. However, he kind of, I guess the most charitable word is, double-crossed Engler in a major political matter. And when his term expired, he was not reappointed by Engler. However, when Governor Snyder came in addition to appointing Bill Martin, he put Chuck Yob back on the commission, and Yob served for a period of time as chairman. Engler also appointed another prominent Democrat as part of an interesting political maneuver. That person was U.S. Congressman J. Bob Traxler of Bay City. J. Bob had been a busboy on the island in his younger days, and he had served in Congress, and then been elected to after Congress, he was elected to the MSU Board of Trustees. So on the MSU Board of Trustees, who are elected on a partisan basis. There were 4 Democrats and 3 Republicans. And Engler, who was an MSU grad, badly wanted to get some control of the Board of Trustees. So he said to Bob Traxler, well, if you decide you'd like to leave MSU Board of Trustees, I have a position for you on the Mackinaw State Park Commission. Traxler was happy to do that because he was growing very restive on the MSU board and also was very critical of the MSU administration. And so he resigned from the MSU board. Engler appointed his good friend Dave Porteous to give Republicans a 4-3 majority, and Porteous became the chairman of the board. And also the way that the vacancy was created for Porteous to become MSU chairman was for Porteous's wife, who was on the commission, to resign and have Engler appoint Traxler to that position. Well, that all went well, but then at the next time we had a Democratic governor, the Democratic governor did not reappoint Bob Traxler. And through all the partisan turmoil, I feel very fortunate that I was appointed by Engler 3 times, and once by Governor Granholm, Democrat. But Governor Granholm called me and made it very clear that although I had served for a number of years still as chair, even though there was a Democratic governor, she called me and indicated it really would be nice if I would step aside as chair and let Frank Kelly be chair.
Yeah.
So the result of that was that I became vice chair, and Frank Kelly became chairman, and the papers of the chairman moved in our Lansing offices from this office 10 feet away to that office. And then when Republicans came back in under Governor Snyder, Frank Kelly resigned as chairman, but not as a member. And I became chairman all over again. So that's kind of the political goings on there. During my time in the commission, we had many dedicated members. Richard Manoogian generously donated his own private funds to acquire lands to preserve. Ken Tyson and Audrey Yeh, representing Mackinaw City, always worked hard to make sure that Mackinaw City was well represented on the commission, and they were very good members. And then Father Jim Williams was appointed by Governor Granholm to be the Mackinaw City representative, and he brought a little man's perspective to the commission and played a vital role in issues involving repatriation of North American remains. Park directors. When I first came to the island, the job of running the state park on a day-to-day basis was bifurcated. Day-to-day operations were handled by a man by the name of Carl Nordberg and his wife, who some said really ran things. But when the 1958 Legislative Act passed, which vastly increased the duties and responsibilities of the commission, the commission sought out a director of historic projects, and they gave that position to Dr. Eugene Peterson, who is an ex-college professor and a well-regarded historian who had headed the Michigan Historical Museum in Lansing. His office manager, who was his right-hand person for many years, was his wife, Marion. Well, after 2 years of bifurcated leadership with Nordberg and Peterson, Peterson basically threatened to resign and go elsewhere, and the commission said, no, we want you. And Nordberg was sort of pushed to the side, and he was ill, and not too long after that passed away. But Gene Peterson then had total running for the day-to-day operations of the fort. He was often an idealist, and he was always a scholar, and he did a lot of really good work to refurbish Fort Mackinac and to recreate Fort Michilimackinac and all the exhibits, programs, and research that provided a high gloss of historical retention and scholarship. Then when Peterson finally retired after many years, the commission, and I was not a member at that time, decided to look for fresh blood, and so they hired a gentleman from Wisconsin, Dave Pamprin. He served for 4 or 5 years, and then he resigned and moved on, and was succeeded by Carl Nold, who came from Pennsylvania State Museum, and he was there for 4 or 5 years. And in between, on an interim basis, David Armour was the director, and Dave Armour did a very fine job as interim director. When news got around that Carl Nold was leaving as the director, many locals on the island and in the area suggested that the commission should really select Phil Porter as the new director. Well, they didn't need to make that suggestion because I was convinced immediately that he was the man to be the successor. He had strong local roots. His grandfather had served on the commission, and he had been a park employee since his college days, and he had ably worked his way up through the ranks, and had great academic credentials, and he was the commission's unanimous choice to become the director in the fall of 2003. In the decade under Porter, the commission's education outreach program was expanded, strategic long-range plans developed, the old Mackinaw Lighthouse reopened, the Richard and Jane Art Manugian on the island opened, and historic Mill Creek Discovery Park created in a rebranding of that site. And during that time, Mackinaw Island was named by the National Geographic Society as one of the top destinations in the country. Well, the commission has had over the years its succession of controversies. And perhaps the most notorious in my time was the Great Lease War of 1991-94. One of the commission's major responsibility was setting the terms and conditions for leasing state lands to private individuals. You know, the East Bluff and the West Bluff, those are all homes up there sitting on state park lands. And this matter of leasing out these properties began at the time of a national park, because the national park needed revenue. And this was one of the few revenue sources they would have, would be the leases amounts that would be paid. So the commission continued the lease program, and by the 1870s and 80s, the major sites on the east and west bluff were built upon with beautiful Victorian homes that exist today. However, it's frequently forgotten that in the Great Depression of the 1930s, many leases went into default for non-payment, and a number of cottages reverted to the state for non-payment of taxes. Summer homes on the bluffs could be bought for $300. Still others were simply boarded up and abandoned. In response, the commission slashed the lease rates by 60% in 1939 and by another 50% in 1942. So from 1942 to 92, a half century later, rents were never raised from the rock bottom levels of the Depression to reflect the selling of these homes now after World War II at prices exceeding $1 and $2 million. Thus, when I came on the commission in 1991, some of the most beautiful and desirable homes in the entire Midwest sat on land for which cottage owners were paying an annual rent of $25, $50, and $75. In my view, not only was this grossly unfair to the state and its citizens, it was a political time bomb. Yes, most cottagers had lovingly protected their homes and spent large amounts of money to maintain them. But I also believe that if and when the general public found out, although it was technically not a secret, they would demand radical reform that would rock state government, the commission, and even the cottage owners themselves. Almost immediately after being appointed to the commission, I became concerned we needed to be more aggressive on this lease amount setting. And I was prepared to take strong steps, but the Detroit News and Free Press, which was published jointly in 1992, carried a front page article, "Leasing State Land on Mackinaw, a Sweet Deal." fat cat millionaires paying $50 a year for sites of $1 million homes. Well, it was quite clear that we had to get moving and keep ahead of that steamroller. At our regular commission meeting 5 days later on January 10th, I asked the commission to take action. Now, I knew from my own legislative experience that to mollify both leaseholders and a skeptical public, it would be far better if the commission could point to an unbiased study and recommendations from an independent group as justification for jacking up rates to the proper levels. From my legislative days, I also knew it was possible to guide an independent body to the desired result, and to do so, it was highly important that the right people do the study and make the recommendations. So I proposed the creation of a Blue Ribbon Advisory Board, and asked to serve as its chairman was Phil Runkle, who was the state superintendent of public instruction, and who was also now the vice president of a small securities firm and the owner of a condominium on non-state land. The others that I had appointed to the panel were Steve Vogel, who was a member of the commission, and he was loyal to me because I convinced Engler to appoint him, and George Yashinsky of St. Ignace, a realtor who had good local credentials as a realtor, and Jennifer Radcliffe, the Michigan Historical Preservation Network president, a director of a real estate firm in Detroit, and the chairman of the Midland, Michigan Planning Commission, and finally, retired Circuit Judge Edward Ned Fenlon of Petoskey, who was very well known, very popular in the area. And in his younger days, it was rumored that he was a rum runner from Canada to Mackinaw. So we had this fine group, but news that the commission was getting serious about land lease reform caused the leaseholders to go ballistic. And chief among the protesters were two retired state appellate court judges, Glenn Allen and John Fitzgerald, both of whom had had long distinguished careers in partisan politics. And I was astounded that, given their political experience, that they could be tone deaf to the mounting clamor for reform of the land leases. Well, to ensure public input would be adequate, the Blue Ribbon Committee held numerous public hearings. Leaseholders showed up in large numbers and conjured up images of the 1930s where they would be forced, because of the new lease rates, to lock up their cottages and abandon them, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what they left unsaid, of course, was that it had been 60 years or more since the Great Depression. Times had changed, and now bluff houses were selling for $1 and $2 and $3 million. Well, the report finally came out in July, after another 2 days of public hearings, and it was a very good, well-done report. And it provided for or recommended a $3,500 annual rent for West Bluff cottages, $2,500 for certain other West Bluff cottages, as well as all East Bluff and Fort Garden cottages, and $1,000 for other cottages. And the rents would be adjusted on a CPI basis annually. And because a number of the leases had been recently renewed before this, it would take 20 years to actually complete the full shift over to the new leases. On August 29th, 1992, after a long public hearing, the commission voted 5-1 to adopt this new schedule. And echoes of the controversy could be heard a year later and beyond. Again, George Weeks of the Detroit News said, and I derived some satisfaction from this, quote, "Cawthorne correctly said the commission had to act because the public would not have tolerated the status quo on a rock-bottom fee for leaseholders of Mackinaw Island lands." Still not letting the matter rest, the Detroit News in 1994 had a headline article, "Anger on Mackinaw Island." And it said that Cawthorne was pitted against the Mackinaw Island Leaseholders Association, and quoted me as saying, "Mackinaw wouldn't be Mackinaw without at least 3 major controversies going on at once." And Weeks then said, "As the debate rages, Cawthorne, as a former leader of the State House of Representatives, reflected that the politics on Mackinaw are at least equal to anything found under the Capitol dome." Okay, Um, so now we do chapter 2 of the Great Lease Wars. And that is that the yacht club was not covered. The yacht club, just before all this broke, had gotten a renewal for 20 years at $1 a year. And that one I knew would really cause things to hit the fan. And so I suggested to the yacht club's members that they might want to be good citizens and voluntarily agree to a new rate schedule. That went nowhere because I think that the yacht club members thought that if they waited 20 years, they could outlast our commission members. So the commission bided its time for the next 19 years. It didn't have any choice. And the year before the $1 a year lease was to expire, I asked the commission staff to inform the yacht club that we would be seeking a major revision in rent so that they could begin to plan their finances. I also noted that the commission was not necessarily bound by the existing top rate for private homes, since that applied to residential use and not the yacht club's commercial use. The reaction of the club's leadership, however, was reminiscent of the cottagers' protests 20 years before. And here we thought we had solved all this. The yacht club commodore first claimed that the lease had somehow automatically renewed for another 20 years at $1 a year. How he ever came up with that, I never could figure out. When that didn't fly, the club sought to postpone any rate hike for a year. When the club's leadership delayed signing a 1-year lease extension, the commission rattled the saber of ejectment from the premises. It didn't take long for the club leadership to see the light. As a result, in May 2010, 20 years after the previous lease wars, a new 20-year lease was executed, not for $1 a year, but $8,500 a year. And according to my calculations, a dues increase of less than $38 a member would cover that. Another big issue for us over the years was land preservation. As I indicated, the state park has 81% of the island's land. I had, before being on the commission, as a legislator, had urged Governor Milliken and the commission to acquire the so-called Stone Cliff property up in the middle of the island. But my idea went nowhere with them. And shortly thereafter, a downstate mortician turned developer, George Staffen, put together a group of people to purchase Stone Cliff. And he was soon working on development plans. However, he was plagued almost from the beginning with foreclosure, threats of foreclosure, and far too little capital. Then in 1982, George Staffen hit pay dirt, literally. The Mackinaw County Circuit Court ruled that his company, Mackinaw Island Development Company Limited, had acquired by adverse possession 36.6 acres of state park land, including 2,250 feet along Lake Huron on the western side of the island. Now, what had happened was that back in 1923, the commission had bought a 43/63 interest in that 36.6 acre parcel. In 1965, the commission, before I or Bill were on, inexplicably failed to assert its rights when the MRA, owner of the remaining 20/63, brought suit against the state for damage the property sustained in an airport construction project. The door was open to Staffen, MRA's successor in interest, to bring an action for adverse possession, and that is what he did, and he won the case. Now, how a claim for adverse possession can prevail against the sovereign, i.e. the state of Michigan, especially if the subject property is publicly used park lands, is a mystery that will defy most lawyers. And that was especially here because the state acknowledged that the plaintiff already had an individual 20/63 interest, something which would explain why MRA's presence on the island, along with the general public's, was neither adverse nor hostile, two of the key elements necessary to perfect a claim for adverse possession. So Staffen got 36.6 acres of state park land. I, again, before being on the commission, approached him and said, how much would it take for the State Park Commission to buy this land back from you? And he said, oh, $300,000. And so I pressed that case and got nowhere. So then, not long after that, Stafford went into bankruptcy, and the property was sold by a bankruptcy court for a fraction of the $300,000 to the Montai Development Corporation of Charlevoix and Petoskey. And in my view, that this would potentially open the way to clear cutting and extensive development of nearly 1/2 mile of road frontage on what had been nearly 3 miles of pristine woods and water extending from the end of the boardwalk below Grand Hotel to a point just south of British Landing. Well, when I became chairman of the commission on February 20th, 1991, I went to the commission and said in a public statement that one of my chief goals was to reacquire, if at all possible, 36.6 acres of land. We never fully succeeded, but we made some good progress. After protracted negotiations, also involving the city of Mackinaw Island, in exchange for needed sewer and water services for 27 home sites, Montais agreed to deed 125 feet of beachfront to the state park and to create a scenic reserve easement in which trees could not be removed. In late 1996, we got still more land south of Browns Brook and obtained scenic easements over still more land, and we purchased then later on another 214 feet, so we got a fair amount of this property back, at least along the shore. And then one of the important acquisitions we made also was to acquire something called Chimney Rock or Sunset Rock, perhaps one of the most beautiful outcroppings on the island. And we succeeded in purchasing that. And Richard Manoogian, Commissioner Manoogian, stepped in with his own funds to acquire and preserve that property from development. I then became also concerned about another issue. And that was that I knew that despite all outward appearances to the contrary, the Mission Point Resort is and was actually landlocked. It has no waterfront ownership, but they frequently used the shoreland fronting the hotel as if they did. So this brought back vivid memories of a 36.6 acre adverse possession land theft in 1983. And so now in 1998, as commission chair, I was determined to not let history repeat itself at Mission Point. The lands in front of Mission Point needed to be permanently identified as state property and demarcated as such. The 2,400-foot waterfront was state-owned, not by the commission, but by the State Waterways Commission. And I asked the Waterways to surrender it to the state park, and they wouldn't do it. But they did agree to the construction of a paved bicycle path that would traverse the entire length of the state shoreline property fronting Mission Point. It, by the way, provides beautiful panoramic views of Round Island Lighthouse, Robinson's Folly, the National Forest, and freighter traffic. And on Memorial Weekend, 1999, the trail was open to the public. And in some respects, this beautiful project is one of my proudest accomplishments from my commission days. And by the way, I believe that the commission is getting title to that property finally from the Waterways. I think that's the case. Funding the park, budget battle, we'll talk just about that for a minute. Finding enough money to operate the park has always been a problem. When the park started out, again, as a state park, it received mainly lease monies and very little state aid. In the early 1900s, finally, there was state aid passed every year, but it was really pretty paltry. But then the commission fared very well in appropriation matters under both Governors Blanchard and Engler. And in 2002, the last year of the Engler budget, the general fund appropriation to the park peaked then at $2 million. Once again, however, the media spotted what they believed a hot story. And on July 2nd, 1994, the Detroit Free Press
featured a front page banner story, Mackinaw Parks feast while others starve. The Free Press said, the commission's overall budget has grown from 2.5 million to 5 million over the space of a few years. And it quoted one very critical person who turned out to be a staff person who thought more money should be spent on digging up the archaeology. The Free Press article went on to say that Mackinaw Island and the forts are coddled jewels, and that the commission, the prize plum among the hundreds of political appointments a Michigan governor can make, operates with remarkable autonomy. The Free Press induced crisis passed, however, and the rest of the 1990s were good years for state appropriations for both state operations and capital outlay, a highlight being $4.5 million to restore the four walls in 2001 and 2. The good news on the budget came to an abrupt end, however, in 2003. The state's fiscal condition had gotten not so good. And we had a new governor, Jennifer Granholm, and she was convinced by her director of the DNR to take an entirely new tack in funding Mackinaw Island. Her plan called for the park's general fund appropriation going from $2 million to 0. Unveiling her budget, the governor called for the commission to replace all general funds with money from unspecified sources, but based on her remarks, she appeared to favor an entry fee for people entering the island. Well, when asked by the press about that, I responded that her proposal was just not workable because there are 20 points of entry from the city to the park, and the commission had no authority, absent legislation, to impose a tax on boat passengers arriving at the dock, which is located in the city. So we adopted a strategy to beat that, and we succeeded. And we did it in a way that did not embarrass the governor. And that was kind of tricky because technically the commission was part of her administration, so we didn't want to embarrass her. So we developed a way to do it without embarrassing her, but the whole idea basically flopped, thank God. And today the park operates with revenues of $6.3 million and is able to operate quite well with that. So I'll just touch on one other thing and then my time is up. And that is the auto ban. As you know, motor vehicles not permitted on Mackinaw Island, although there's a story, I think, in the news tonight that on the state highway there's being imposed for the first time a speed limit on the state highway over there. That's for bikes. E-bikes have gotten pretty fast, so the legislature, with some urging, passed a law putting a speed limit on bikes on the island, on the highway. But anyway, in 1898, the city of Mackinaw Island, village of Mackinaw Island, banned motor vehicles because one was over there and scared the horses, and also the people who ran the horse industry wisely figured we don't need this competition, and so they urged the village council to adopt a ban, which they did. The commission adopted its own ban in 1901, and things really came to a head in 1935 when a man by the name of E.M. Tellefson would regularly take his automobile, and he lived at the north end of the island, take his automobile and drive to his work at the top of the island. And finally, the state and the city got super ticked off and threatened him with fines and jailing, and that ended his movements with that automobile, although the car itself remained on the island for just the last year or two. And then many people are surprised to know that in the 1930s, there was a fairly serious proposal by the former state highway commissioner and others to connect Sheboygan to Boblo Island via causeway and bridges, Boblo to Round Island, causeway and bridges, Round Island to Mackinaw, causeway and bridges, and then have automobiles go around the east side of the island, the north, and then depart on causeway and bridges to St. Ignace. Fortunately, that eventually never went anywhere. Although also the superintendent of the state park in 1927 proposed that state ferries bring cars to the island in order to get more people over there, and
and they would be put in a car park, and then horses would come out and take people into town. Well, they did create the dock, the British Landing Dock, to do that. They did clear out a big area for the cars. No cars ever came, but about 700 people came to that site, and it was said that most of them were probably rum runners during Prohibition. And that basically fizzled out, but the empty site and the British Landing Dock are still there. Well, you've been a wonderful audience. I hope you have found this interesting. I appreciate your time.
Any questions for Dennis? One of the things I have fought for very hard in my 12 years on the commission is I want them to return a horse and carriage to the commission. One of the people I forgot to introduce, the most important person in our whole board, Donna Fowler, is our treasurer. And any of you who would like to part with some money, see Donna. Thank you for coming. There's some refreshments in the rear. Any questions for Dennis at all? Yes.
What's happening now with electric bikes?
Well, yeah, well, see, the horse is out of the barn, so to speak. They are legal if you have a disability. But all you have to do basically is assert a disability, because under HIPAA, you can't ask about it. So what the island has said is that e-bikes with throttles are not permitted. But I think there still are some over there with throttles. But e-bikes are legal if you have a disability, but there's no way to prove you do or don't. That meets the Americans with Disability Act.
The one thing that has happened that has helped us is that the act where they can no longer have throttles limits them to type 1 e-bikes, which are those that are pedal assisted. And then if people with disabilities can rent scooters. So it has gotten better. It has gotten better. The enforcement, as Dennis said, is a bit of a nightmare, but the cooperation between the village and the commission has been excellent. So we're working on it. Anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I guess I'll make that vote too. Hold, Judge.
You didn't tell us the name of that path that you went through.
Oh, well, it's named after me. Except that the high water knocked it out, and so right now, they're gonna rebuild it, they say.
Okay,
But the
it's a
sign
shame
there.
that it's got.
Great job. It was a great job.
Thank you.
Give you a hug.
Thanks, Dennis.
Oh, you're very welcome.
I've been working for the commission since 2007, so it's good. Yeah, you guys do such a good job of taking care of us. Like, it's good to hear this commission history from you. Like, I've mostly heard it from Mr. Wilson. Who knows it inside and out, but
Thank you so much. I love the World War II part, because I do all that history and I really enjoy that. So I can add that to my tour when I give tours.
Yeah.
Greg.
Great, yeah.
Thank you for your service.
Hanging in there. Still walking your dog?